Hi. All right, so hopefully as people join, we'll start in 1 to 2 minutes if folks can hear me. Hopefully, we'll see. Maybe this will be a panel for just us. Either way.
Hey, we had fun talking just us the other day. It's all good.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll just enjoy the wonderful weather we have here and wherever this yacht is sitting. And I'll plan to start in another minute. All right. Okay. So in the chat, you'll just have noticed, I'll just reinforce the fact that if you would like to ask questions, please use the Q&A box on your screen. And if there are some questions that pop up towards the end, I'll stop and ask those. But without further ado, I will jump into the panel, assuming that there's millions of people watching right now. This panel, this wonderful panel. We got a good one for you today. The topic is there's a party going on, but it's not third party. I know we're all missing going to real life parties right now and have to settle for some wonderful background images of a yacht. So let's not get distracted by that part. And this panel is about third party data, commonly raised questions, personal experience, and expectations for future of our industry. We do have a fantastic panel today of experts to help us dive in. But in lieu of rattling off a bunch of current and former career titles for each of our panelists, or worse, having them do it themselves, we decided to share a few quick words about each of their connection to this particular topic around data. So I asked them for some help with that. And so to get the conversation started, I'm gonna go through that real quick. But if you wanna learn more about their backgrounds, I'm sure you can go to LinkedIn and follow them on Twitter and wonderful things they have to say. So first up, we have Shenan Reed, president at Publicis and overseeing the GSK business. Shenan started in data and analytics, attempting to better understand consumers. With a background in CPG analytics, she spent a great deal of time developing consumer audiences for the offline world, which ultimately drove her to digital so that she may better understand audiences in a more direct, one-to-one way. Welcome, Shenan. We also have Stephen Zangre, who cut his teeth in the 90s on the power of first-party data driving business outcomes, including the evolution of access to data and its ability to quantify impact or strategy for advertisers. That was the starting point of a career that has led to his current position as CRO at Holler.io. Good morning, Stephen, or good afternoon if we're in some far-off place. Lauren Bernard is up next. Lauren has a deep programmatic background across data targeting and then OTT and CTV during her time at Freewheel. Now at Kinesso, she's VP of Marketplace Solutions and tasked with migrating away from demo-based audience solutions, integrating the worlds together to solve for audience guarantees and identity challenges, especially in the all-important upfronts. And finally, Jake Abraham. Jake is a content creator. So what's he doing on a data panel? Well, as president at Audigent, he now gets to take his life experience and true understanding of creators and apply it to a role where he stresses not only the importance of owning your own content, but also owning and enabling your own first-party data stack in a world that's seemingly more dominated than ever by Facebook and Google and others. So that's an amazing panel. Let's get into it. The first person I'm gonna call on is Shenan, so get ready for this question, Shenan. My CMO wrote the title of this panel, There's a Party Going On, but it's not third party. Is he trying to be provocative? Or is the premise of this fair and actually pretty obvious? Has third-party data lost its shine with cookies, going away someday? Shenan, what do you think?
Sure. That's funny. One of my favorite books is how luxury lost its luster. And I think I wrote a LinkedIn article with a similar title. So are we talking about has third party lost its luster? Maybe a little bit. It's definitely a provocative title, so I applaud your CEO for choosing it. And hopefully it's drawn us a really nice and interested audience today. Yeah, I think we're in a place where we're really having to evaluate what it means to be third party. And I also think there's still a tremendous amount of confusion among clients, among marketers, among media people of what actually is the definition of first, second, and third party data. Because your first party is not my first party. We each have our own first party. So how do we commingle that first party? And there's a tremendous amount of confusion in the marketplace about that. So I think the more we can come together and define, the more we can pull it all together and make sure we all understand exactly what it is we're talking about in any given moment. That'll make it clearer and easier. But yes, the ultimate answer there, I think, is that third-party data has likely lost its luster, and we need better ways of connecting your first party and my first party to make smarter decisions.
Thank you. Jake, I'm going to throw it to you. What are your thoughts on what Shenan just said? And obviously, your hands are partially in third-party data today. I know you have other things going on, but tell us more about your thoughts on this.
Yeah, we're all first party. No third party in our universe. So yeah, I mean this panel is certainly set up for a company like Audigent, where we've from our founding almost 4 years ago been believers in the value of publisher first party data, and so we've leaned very hard into that. And so the recent announcements around whether it's Apple or Google and the importance of first party data, the deprecation of third party certainly plays into any premium publisher's hands that has audience and content that they want to monetize.
All right, Lauren, shifting it over to you. Is this provocative premise? What do you think about third party? How is that affecting your world? How are you dealing with it as part of your strategy? Very much interested in obviously your opinion about the upfronts coming up. I'm sure a lot of other people are as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think that, the concept of third-party data and in general, the types of data that matter to advertisers, it really varies depending on the advertiser and what type of transaction data they have available to us and what types of data in market would really be meaningful for them to be able to measure outcomes for their business or to create interesting ways to target consumers. I can say that for the upfront, and a lot of what we're focusing on as a business coming off of the Axiom acquisition is to really create ways that we can get closer to the source of whatever data set it is that would be impactful for our advertisers, and create ways to really tie those data sources together with the actual media properties that we're investing in a way that doesn't require third-party cookies. And so that looks very different depending on the media property you're talking about and the data asset you're talking about. But I certainly think that as we, create those ties in the ecosystem, that, third party, it certainly will affect that side of the ecosystem.
All right, and Stephen, just to give everyone a chance to say that they appreciate the title or not for my CMO, what are your thoughts on this?
At Holler, we don't really have much use for third-party data. Our integrations with whether it be chat applications, messaging platforms, keyboards, apps, we rely on first-party data to provide the best product and service, whether it be to our publishers to provide their users with engaging experiences to align against their user engagement KPIs, whether it be for the user so that they can have the best experience, and also recognize that there's a trust involved, and for us to provide that in a transparent and safe way. And then certainly for advertisers, that first party data allows us to get rich insights into whether it be the elements of conversation, and provide that back to advertisers so they can think about that not only from their media buying for media buying purposes, but also in the creative strategy process. So sort of wrap it up, third party doesn't really have a place in our world. we rely on the integrations and first-party data of our partners.
All right, well, I'm going to say that that panel, the title is true based on all of that, so thank you. Now, before we go forward, I just want to say, like, as defining for this next question, there's obviously first-party publisher data, which is commonly, we talk about first-party, we're thinking about publisher data. But there's also the first-party, like, advertiser data, right? The customer data. I'm curious, it all starts with the buyer, the demand, you know, usually, typically, what is an advertiser really looking for? Shenan, over to you on this. At a baseline, let's get an understanding of some of the basics here. What are marketers looking for? What data are they trying to collect, match, better understand, performance, targeting, all the above?
Yeah, I think every marketer that I've worked with, when I work with marketers who have direct consumer capabilities, they sit on a plethora of data, right? If you're a hotel chain, if you're a retailer, an online retailer, which I've worked with many over the years, your first party data is tremendous. And you have this incredible asset of knowing your consumer almost better than anybody else does, especially as it lives and breathes within your ecosystem of your products. For CPG brands who don't have that D2C connection yet, there's a hole in their understanding. There's this missing collection, and I think all of them are desperate to get to that level of connection back to their consumer. And if you're a wine and spirits brand, it's really hard to have that direct consumer relationship when really you have to go through a distributor and a bartender in order to reach your consumer. You're not, and unless you're a wine company in California that is actually the vineyard, you can't really ship directly to your customer. I know way too much about the detail on that, don't I? But it's an interesting place to be as a CPG consumer. I think the goal for all of them, and this is not GSK exclusive, I think this is across what I'm seeing in the ecosystem, is more. How do I get more first party connections to consumers? And the challenge that every CPG company has in that space is, what are you offering to the consumer back that is of value, that says, I want to give you my email address. I want you to have that first party cookie on me. I want you to understand me that way. And I think that's where they're all really trying to build out some type of value proposition back to their customer base that says there's a reason to want to connect directly with X brand. But the more they can build out that first party connection, and that also may mean borrowing on first party connections. So their consumer connection is going to be really small. Your publisher connection is going to be much bigger. What's the opportunity for us to take our first party, marry it to your first party, have a better understanding of those two pieces, and then ultimately use that to broaden a lookalike audience that gets us a smarter, more actionable, probably better performing audience at the end of the day.
I think we're all a little jealous of those folks who are after 5 p.m. right now able to drink some wine. So it's okay. I understand the wine examples.
Where's my rosé?
Yeah, exactly. Jake, you know, if you're a wine advertiser in the south of France right now, no, I'm joking. What are you looking for? What are you seeing in your experience right now that advertisers are asking most for? What's the demand for right now in terms of data?
Well, interestingly, right now, because the moment we're in is heavily impacted by a global pandemic, what we're seeing is that the awareness type campaigns that brands were spending on before have really shrunk, and performance media is everything right now. So we're seeing a ton of additional demand for like the most efficient ways to reach audiences, as budgets are either shrinking or there are ways in which the side of the C-suite, which is putting pressure on the marketing teams, is saying you've got to be even more efficient than ever before. So we're seeing more increased demand for that. I think in general, though, like following up on what Shenan was saying regarding advertisers and agencies overall, I think there's interest, as she was saying, in terms of brands that have massive first-party data stacks. That's absolutely true, and we find that incredibly compelling and interesting. Usually that first-party data is relatively specific to the vertical or the transaction in which they operate, and so often there's an interest in seeing what else do I know about this consumer that maybe I don't sit on top of directly. So what other signals can I find? We know that all these consumers, you know, we call them 360 consumers. We talk to agencies where they're very interested in data for in market for my product, which is really not what we traffic in at all. We're very interested in what are the other signals and behaviors and affinities that these audiences show through the publishers where they are most engaged. We represent Warner Music Group. What artists are they listening to? We represent big lifestyle publishers. What are the other brands that they're interested in? What TV shows? What types of films? And so those other signals that really start to round out that consumer really paint the larger picture than just in market for my product at this moment.
So speaking of the signals and sort of like intent signals and other signals to create a more engaging experience for the individual, I'm actually going to skip, sorry, Lauren, I'll come right back to you, but Stephen, because I know this is your space, like around your more one-to-one conversational connection, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that and what signals you're finding and what you're looking for brands.
Yeah, I'm going to build off what Shenan said, is that what we provide to whether it be marketers is just an understanding of how consumers are speaking about whether it be their brand, their category. For instance, I'm going to use her wine and spirits example, is that when people are talking about getting together and celebrating, what time of day or when are they usually sharing that or having those conversations? And within those conversations, what are the terms and phrases or even the imagery that they use? Typically, when do they talk about going to happy hour? And again, what brands are mentioned? So for us, it's really leveraging this first party data to get a deep and this rich data set, getting a deep understanding of the elements of conversation at the category and brand level, and then providing those rich insights back to brands and to marketers so they can think about, again, the creative strategy and how to best activate and how to provide content to users that is shareable at that relevant moment. Again, back leveraging that rich first party data set.
So if we're talking about collection first as a first step towards that, right? You can't deliver that until you've collected it and figured out what it is you're seeing there. Lauren, I mean, how are you looking at that? What does collection look like? Maybe what are you collecting, but also like how are you collecting it, and how are you then manifesting it and changing it and you know, integrating it with what you have on the agency level, and how do brands do it on the brand level?
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I think the answer to that question really varies depending on the client. We represent, you know, many different types of clients, from auto to CPG to clients like Amazon and Hulu and Spotify, who are, you know, are great examples of ones that have a really comprehensive view of their customer base. And so it really depends. So, you know, we have a team within Kinesso that really offers you know, a consultancy service that helps brands either make use of their first party data or create custom target audiences that are oftentimes supported by the Axiom team that helps them kind of define like what is their target customer. And so, I mean, that's a huge focus for our agency this year is really helping brands that haven't already taken that step into defining what their audience target is and how does that audience target maybe change depending on whatever the campaign strategy is and things like that. But I think it's also taking it a step further than just defining what the target audience is, because even for advertisers who know who their customer base is and know who they want to reach with advertising, there's still challenges in a cookieless world when you're trying, like outside of the programmatic ecosystem, when you're trying to find ways to, you know, holistically allocate dollars across all of these media properties and understand post-campaign, like what was my unique reach against this audience across these different media partners and which one is really performing better than the others. And, you know, so I think there's, that's a more of a similar challenge across clients, I think, in terms of how we tie their data into the media and then create value stories to help advertisers to really benchmark against more traditional tactics, and then what does a data-driven efficiency tactic look like. And so it's really moving from savings-based goals to efficiency goals, and that's something that was really born out of the programmatic ecosystem and something that we want to create ways to disseminate across you know, the more traditional media buys.
I want to get into the agency side of this, but before I'm gonna downshift into publisher side, because of the millions of people watching this this panel. I'm gonna do something that a moderator never does, which is I'm gonna ask one of the Q&A questions immediately as it's happening, because one of them was really great. And Ross from MediaLink, who I love, asked a question about how do we get data? How do we get that data? How do we get acceptance for sharing that data? Oh, thanks, Ross. Wonderful. So how do we get those customers to share their data with us? I mean, that's really one of the bigger questions we have right now. One of the bigger challenges, I think, for the ad ecosystem is, as consumers get more savvy to this space and understand what's happening, or at least are skeptical about what's happening, how do we do that? How do we collect that data? You know, Jake, you're really in this world. I'll go to you right away. How are we collecting that data? How are we ensuring that there's proper consent? Are we paying consumers, which I love the concept of that? What are we doing? What do you think we're going to be doing soon?
Yeah, well, I mean, right now the legislation is relatively clear. So between GDPR and CCPA and what's coming to bear in Brazil and Korea and Japan, there's pretty clear guidance on what the global footprint looks like for proper consent. We represent global publishers, so from day one, our CTO is also London-based, so it's great. We've got a lot of guidance there from the early days of GDPR. So compliance is relatively clear. There's also not just the letter of the law, there's also the kind of ethical impacts as well. So we're helping our publishers ensure that they are compliant. You know, usually a consent management framework is something that any large publisher is using. We're fully integrated with those. So the compliance piece is kind of step one. I think the bigger piece in terms of what our audience is willing to give up to get that content, I think that happens on a publisher by publisher basis. And I think that's where the value of premium publishers will just continue to grow. I think that there is always been an understanding that things are free and there is a balance there. We get free content in return potentially for data or other types of value. And you know, I think that eventually we'll be potentially moving to some asymmetrical or incongruous data transfer along with content creation or content consumption, meaning that we won't necessarily be watching the ad at the moment we want to read the article or watch the video. So I think that we could very easily be moving into that world sooner than later. We have the technology to do it. We're looking for more advertisers and agencies that want to get into that space. But I think that the digital goods world is one where first-party data will absolutely be a huge part of the future of that ecosystem. So I'm not terribly concerned. I think that for the right publishers, there will always be big audience. You know, our goal is to make sure that the walled gardens and you know, those that have the most power don't get to keep all of the data, and that our publishers continue to find ways to not only collect their data, but action that data in ways that's valuable to them and their audiences.
Shenan, since you inspired the question, want to throw it over to you?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's a challenge for brands and manufacturers to figure out what that value proposition is. And it could be as simple as, you know, we have a great newsletter. I hate saying that, but like, if there's on the brand site, what I hate seeing brands do, because I think it can be a downward spiral pretty quickly, is collecting first party data through couponing. I think it's just too easy to say, hey, get 50% off or get a 50-cent coupon on a, you know, $6 product if you give us your email address. That's not a real value exchange as far as the consumer is concerned. Yes, there's dollars associated to it, but it's a one-time kind of shot in the arm, and it usually leads to that consumer feeling like the value of that product should be that much less on a regular basis. And we've seen retailers go through that often, especially here in the Northeast. We've had some major retailers over the years who got into heavily discounting their products. You wouldn't walk into one of these retailers without a coupon. If, matter of fact, the person at the register would be like, do you have the coupon? If you don't, let me get one for you. That just immediately starts to diminish the value of the products. You have to be really, really, really careful. But when it comes to, can a brand be responsible for having great content that draws a consumer back? What's the value of the website at the end of the day for any given brand? If we're not a D2C brand, I don't know that I'm going to go buy toothpaste on just a toothpaste brand site. I'm probably going to buy it from an aggregator where I can buy a bunch of product in one place. How much content do I need about brushing my teeth? I would argue that only 98% of the US population actually brushes their teeth, which is a bit disturbing. So maybe we need more. There's opportunity for growth there. Yeah, I know, it makes you cringe, doesn't it? Yeah, they're fascinating, some of the statistics you get into when you work on certain clients. But the opportunity to partner with our media partners on creating content, on that content not necessarily living on the brand site, but living in places where consumers consume content, on creating things that are of interest and of value in other places. It's going to make for several different forms, and I think every media partner and every advertiser is going to have to be very careful of CCPA and GDPR and what it means and how it all comes together, and that we're treating the consumer's data with the level of, I hate to say preciousness because that's not the word I'm looking for, but reverence maybe is a better word, that we're ultimately, we should be treating it with.
Lauren, with all the sort of compliancy and regulation around this, and how sort of challenging it is to get someone to say maybe, yes, I'm happy to give my data over for some toothbrushing content, which apparently we all need to be watching more of, which is gross. Lauren, what are the challenges? I mean, everyone talks about scale being a big challenge. What are some of the other challenges we should be looking out for? And is that just the one challenge that really supersedes them all?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, and I'll actually make a comment that maybe contradicts a little bit the I guess the result that we're talking about here. But I remember when GDPR first went into effect, when I was working at Freewheel, and we had they had acquired sticky ads, a French SSP, and we were looking at a lot of bid request data, and like fill data, and it was very interesting because you could see clearly based on fill rates when GDPR went into effect, because there was a dip in ads because of all of the users not yet having opted into cookie tracking, and a lot of the programmatic transactions that required cookies for frequency capping and things like that. And so there was a dip, but the dip really just lasted for a few days. And we found that actually most consumers just click yes because they want to see the content and they don't really think too much about it. And so it's something that is certainly a movement, and it's something that we as an industry need to be responsible about, protecting consumers' data and everything. But from a scale perspective, I haven't personally seen huge ramifications on the scale side. I think that what is more important, is as these, as third-party cookies fade away, how do we create the right connections with our major media partners so that we ensure that we're able to create advertising experiences that are bespoke for the consumers. And there's also a lot of research that has shown that when advertising is able to be customized for the consumer, that there's better performance because they react better to ads that are somewhat relevant to them. And so I think that more and more as consumers are educated about data privacy and about what it means when you download a random app on your phone and they're probably selling your location data to someone or whatever. I think people need to understand how that works a little bit better so that they know what decisions to make. But from what I've seen, most consumers just say yes because they want to access the app, and they don't really think about what might happen with their data, because we also live in a society where, even though data is largely aggregate, it's aggregated. It's not like some other countries around the world where sometimes data can be used in, personally identifiable ways, which is something that you see a lot with COVID that's happening, and how different countries are handling data as it relates to COVID and tracking users. And that's I think reflective of our nation and the major in the European market as well.
So Lauren,
what's interesting? I was going to say, interesting. Sorry, I didn't mean to step on you, Mike, but like, I think it's interesting that you're the first person to really bring up PII on this panel, because I think that in some ways that underlies a lot of this discussion. And I don't know that even as an ad tech executive, I yet know how that commingling is really going to move forward, because we're in the totally anonymized part of this business. We want to stay in the totally anonymized part. That's where we think we belong, and we think that's the most compliant. We think that's for user privacy, where we want to be. And yet I see this move towards CDP, Salesforce moving towards CDP, where there's a massive CRM stack. There was a former third-party DMP. Now there's kind of this commingled with, of course, a massive firewall. They'll never touch each other, right? But how do we know? How does that exist? Is that compliant? And time again, I think we're going to see that continue to surface. Like, how does the PII play in, obviously Dentsu made a huge bet on a PII-based system. Like, what are the ways in which we will be able to programmatically identify audiences, continuing to do that in an anonymous way, yet using PII that kind of backs it up? I was looking at LiveRamp's new solution, which is it's hashed email, but then it gets purged before it gets connected to an audience. I mean, there's all of these kind of like workarounds that I'm seeing, but ultimately there's going to have to be some real big decisions around like, how does PII connect to programmatically identifiable audiences? And I don't know the answer to that yet. And I am slightly concerned for the consumer that we make the right decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting comment, because certainly, the IPG acquisition of Acxiom, that's a very heavily PII driven data business. And that's very much, how we as an agency drive our strategy and how we create those linkages I'm talking about with major publisher partners. So publisher partners who have subscriber data, like that makes a lot of sense in terms of how we connect audiences to those publishers, and then understand match rates, understand viewership information and potential reach, and being able to tie various publishers' PII data back to Acxiom into an anonymized ID, which then we can leverage within tool sets on the Kinesso side in a fully, privacy compliant way. Without third-party cookies, like what else are you going to do? I mean, I think certainly LiveRamp plays an important role in the ecosystem right now to create those linkages into the digital first environments, ones that don't have PII associated with them, which when you look across the digital space, it's not all publishers do have PII. And so you do need to have other ways of matching into those environments. So there's some interesting things that I've seen in market recently. Block Graph, I don't know if you guys have seen the trades on that recently, but yes. Some former colleagues at Freewheel are kind of the founding members there. So I was familiar with what was going on from that perspective early on, but it is, again, kind of PII based, but working with MVPDs to enable, privacy compliant ways of matching, household level MVPD data to companies like Acxiom. And that's kind of a unique solution, because MVPDs, if they also are the internet provider for the household, then they have access to the IP address, which they can deterministically match to PII in the household. And so those are some interesting evolutions that I'm seeing happen. That's which I'm excited about, especially as it relates to upfront partners and how do we tie these things together in market. And so we'll see how those things evolve, but I certainly think that PII will play a role in connecting the ecosystem moving forward, unless the government tells us we can't.
Right, that's always there. I think they're busy with some other things right now. Shenan, tying it all together, right? That's then that's like seemingly one of the bigger challenges. How do we solve for that? How do we, ensure that the right data is coming through, and that we're analyzing it correctly, that we're tying it to the buys that are being made, and the strategies that are 6 to 18 months prior being made? How do you pull it all together?
Yeah, I mean, the tools and the technology are there. They're getting better and smarter every day. LiveRamp pays a piece of that, as Lauren said. Whatever whatever DSP and consumer data set that you're, or consumer data platform that you're using, all kind of pull it together in places. What it requires ultimately is a really great data and analytics team who can look at all of that information and start to segregate it for us and make sure that we understand exactly what it's doing for us. And it requires the best setup. And I can't stress that enough. The setup is so important to understanding how this stuff performs. And I've seen it happen time and time again where somebody gets really excited about a data set and they throw it into market and they don't realize all of the other factors that are leading into its either success or demise. And it could be that it's not supported by search. It's something as simple as that. It could be that it's inflated because there's a massive TV buy happening at the same time. So getting a true data and analytics team who has the ability to be able to do A and B testing correctly, because that is done incorrectly so often, is really important. I just want to, if I can, Michael, for a second, be a bit provocative on all of this. Won't be too provocative, but a bit provocative on all of this. In that Lauren was talking about, all of the different data sets that we use and the tools that we use, like LiveRamp, et cetera, not to pick on LiveRamp, but we talked about this as a group once before. The cost of doing all of this is high. And it's why I say you have to have a really great DNA team, and you have to have a team that understands how to set up these tests correctly to make sure that it is truly the right value that you're getting out of these data sets and out of all of the tools that you use in order to get these data sets into market and to activate against that media. It adds up really quickly. And I can think back to the late 90s, early 2000s, when we were working with, small ad server companies who were still independent and, small data sets, and everything was direct to the consumer. And even then we were complaining about, 4, 5, 6% of our media spend being non-working media that was going into ad serving. Now we're talking about truly ad policing, right? Like we have to have all of these tools to make sure that things are viewable, that they're seen, that they're not fraudulent, that they're not running against the right inclusion lists or exclusion lists. And then we have to pay for the activation of the data. That I could go on for days, and so could everybody on this panel. We've got a laundry list of all the things that go into that non-working media, and it's getting upwards of 40% for some of our clients. That is an outrageous amount of money to be putting into targeting, and I don't know that we're seeing a 40% additional return on our investment for that level of targeting. So when I try to advise clients in this space, I really want them to think strategically about the data usage and the data costs, and is it really worth not just all of that cost, but then the additional FTEs that you need to put on top of that to make sure that it's right. And don't skimp on those FTEs. And it's not because I'm an agency person and I want you to pay for additional agency people. I don't care where you get those people, but if you don't have the people to truly interpret and understand it, I think you're running up you're running into an issue long term.
Yeah, I know we talked about that in our briefing call. And I mean, I think that is really that is the core challenge that we face as agencies right now, because you're coming from a world where, large media deals are really savings focused. So it's about buying in bulk and getting discounts. And so, I mean, and something that Jake said earlier about COVID and how, reduced media budgets is driving the need for efficiency. So I think it's interesting because it creates a situation where more marketers care about the efficiency of their dollars, because maybe they're not buying as heavily in the upfront or something. And so all of a sudden, investing in data for a better outcome makes sense. But unless we're able to, post-campaign, create appropriate benchmarks which demonstrate the value of an audience-driven and audience measured buy as compared to your standard, Nielsen demo buy, you need to create those value stories. And there's a lot of, data requirements on the back end to kind of stitch everything together so that you can tell that story. And there's a lot of cost with making that happen. So even, creating that value story in a truly holistic way across your entire media budget, it's a huge challenge. And, something that we're working on, very diligently this year with a lot of our clients.
So if things are so costly and so taxing and so complicated and so challenging, why don't we just go back into a world where publisher brand may matter more, where context may matter more than the data behind it? Stephen, what do you think about that? Or feel free to talk more about how valuable data is and how important, ensuring we have the right team to analyze all of it is, or should we just simplify it all?
Sure. We have very, very different challenges than some of the folks on this panel as I'm listening, and it's really great. But for us, it's about a fair and transparent value exchange with consumers. And, we're a distributed platform, and we rely on first-party data in order to create, in order for us to understand and analyze the elements of conversation and then recommend a piece of content. For us, in order for us to continue to have that level of access, it's critically important for us to have that trust associated with the Holler brand. Like Visa, if you will. We want to be that brand that when you see our logo, like you see Visa on like a tiki hut in somewhere far away, and you see the Visa logo and you trust it. So for us, we want users across all our partner platforms that when they see our brand, that they trust us, because we believe that your conversation is your own, and we're leveraging the information provided by our partners to make that experience better. But there's got to be a fair and transparent value exchange so that consumer feels comfortable and it benefits all constituents. And then as we bring advertisers in, so we come at the use of first-party data sort of very different than the rest of the panel. But for me, it's about making sure that we're a trusted brand because your conversations are your own. We're delivering and recommending content based on the context of your conversation, and now we're allowing brands to participate in that experience.
Jake, my former content brother, we both grew up in creating content, context. Does that matter? Does that have an implication on the data you're collecting? Can you marry the two? Is it difficult? How do you do it? How do you make context matter?
Well, I mean, it depends in what scenario. I mean, there's the contextuality of the data that we're collecting, and then there's the contextuality in terms of the targeting for actual display and video media. So for us, it's relatively easy. We're very clear on the contextuality when we're collecting data. I mean, we're doing that in partnership with publishers, so that's easy. And then in terms of the advertising itself, well, that's done in conjunction with advertising partners. I just wanted to go back to what Lauren was saying for 1 minute, because I do think it's really interesting to talk about, or even Shenan, in terms of like the old way we used to do things. And I'm one of the newer people on the panel, but at the same time, I'm very familiar with the ways that we used to advertise. And it seems like that most of this comes out of the desire for more attribution and more targeting. I mean, the days when I was growing up, 10 channels, you watch TV, the attribution around that was relatively zero. It's been fantastic for Nielsen. They've built a massive business on the targeting and attribution, as small as it is. The amount of research that's been required. I mean, Nielsen's not cheap, because you look at what it actually takes to do the panel data, to do the diaries, to do all of the things that Nielsen has had to do over the years to try to get some sort of signal, which we don't even know how actually accurate most of it is. There's tons of sales lift data. I mean, there's so much that goes into it, as opposed to some of the targeting now, where we're looking for the level of accuracy and attribution in each single channel, which creative actually led to which transaction, where were shopping carts abandoned. I mean, the amount of data that advertisers and agencies are looking for is extraordinary. And so I think there's absolutely a need through SPO and through all of these middlemen that are hopefully getting flushed out of the system. I mean, there's a massive amount of laziness that unfortunately our own industry has allowed to kind of creep in. And hopefully there is going to be a new set of players as the technology gets more complex as the need for transparency gets more apparent, hopefully the right players will be in the space that do truly provide value and can show the advertisers and agencies where that value really is. And we have to police ourselves to some degree. GDPR is not going to solve the problem of 40% or 50% ad tax. So hopefully we will do that job. We're partnering with companies like Smart Ad Server, right? Like we're trying to make the right connections to ensure that there's like the best path from the consumer to the advertiser, and then that transaction is very clean and transparent. There's still a ton of work to do there, and hopefully, we can show the value, because again, agencies and advertisers are looking for cost per acquisition, cost per click, whatever those metrics are. Like if they don't work for the advertiser, then we don't have a job.
There's another question here that actually, yeah, Lauren, I was going to go to you on this anyway. You don't have to politely raise your hand, just jump right in. But there's
I was going to say just one comment off of what he was saying quickly, but I mean, and back to your kind of original question, like, why are we doing this if there's so much cost to it? And, within the closed ecosystems, within Facebook and within YouTube buying, like there's examples of, truly closed loop, data-driven advertising that demonstrates performance, right? And so like I think there's tangible examples as to why we know it works, and the challenge of bringing that to the broader ecosystem, especially when you get to some of your more traditional publishing companies. Certainly the SPO challenge, all of that, like there's so many things that cause that incremental cost. But I think the reason is because we want to have alternatives to just buying Google preferred or just buying Facebook all the time. And, those are proven channels, but how do we bring that same closed loop, I guess, tactic to the more traditional media buys, which are still incredibly important from a reach perspective, as well as from a, just quality placement perspective. I mean, I think that anyone without knowing anything about advertising would tell you that probably, seeing a 30-second spot on your Hulu, as you're watching, that's going to probably be more impactful than, an ad that you see for 2 seconds as you're scrolling through your feed. So I think there's reasons why we think it'll work. But
instead of recreating the closed loop elsewhere, I think we also have to fight for opening up that closed loop.
Yes.
Because the challenge we have, right, is that those closed loops create an echo chamber that we don't understand the influence of that consumer. Everybody who's attending this talk today, and everybody who's on this panel today, we all, I'm sure, log into Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, Walmart, etc. And those closed loops are not the only thing that's influencing that purchase, and not the only thing but that's all we see.
Yeah.
And I think that attribution it's such a missing piece of
and it's really just because they have the data to tie it together that we ascribe value to it, not because it truly is the most valuable placement. And so the more that we as agency partners, like you said, can drive towards openness across those media partners, but then create those same solutions so that we can truly benchmark an NBC FEP buy against a Facebook buy or a Google preferred buy.
Right.
You mean so they're not just grading their own homework?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Google and Facebook.
Hey, I want to grade my own homework too.
Yeah, me too.
So we have a question from the audience here that I think is important for this. As we talk about this, a lot, the vast majority of money is being spent in upfronts, targeting broad-based demos and buying against that in a sort of more old school way as compared to what we've been talking about. How do we guarantee that we can target those impressions and towards business outcomes in a more, in a television, more analog sort of space, if you will, versus a lot of the digital stuff that we're now able to do with data. And I would ask that to anybody. I mean, I know, Lauren, you have a special, focus on it. So
I mean, it's literally what I'm living and breathing every day the past few months the never-ending upfront year. But yeah, I mean, it's a huge challenge. Like, one of the challenges being that, you know, on the TV network side, they literally have two different systems for managing yield for a demo-based, for a goal with like a demo-based guarantee, and then the network data products, which service any sort of campaign that has data-driven goals. And so, and historically, those deals are still demo guaranteed. And so when you are trying to migrate towards a world where your outcomes are delivery based, you need to create a solution from a data perspective where, at least in the first and maybe also second year, you can benchmark against the traditional Nielsen metrics, but then also the audience metrics. And so you kind of have to pay Nielsen then to tell you, based on the Nielsen demo breaks, what was the reach against your custom audience. And so that's a lot of what we are working on right now, is figuring out, like, what are the business rules? How can we migrate towards, you know, maybe it's a guarantee on demo with a 70%, you know, benchmark against an audience. But then it's a challenge for the networks, who have two totally different systems for optimizing on demos versus audiences. Like, how do we create a dual guarantee? But, you know, if there's incremental cost in having purely just an audience guarantees, then how do you rationalize that cost when you haven't proven out the value yet? So, so we've been working very closely with, you know, our media partners to figure out business rules to enable that kind of gradual transformation. But then, you know, also working with our advertisers and understanding, like, what are the value stories that we need to put in front of them, and how can we create opportunities to peel off test budget to prove out different tactics, or work with different, you know, partners in this space on the data side who have insights on, you know, if we employ this type of tactic, what is the expected, you know, reduced cost per incremental reached user, or something like that. And so there's a lot, you know, it's definitely a challenge, but it's going to require working with media partners to create business rules that allow us to migrate towards something that's audience focused, and then working with advertisers to, you know, and there's a risk on their side, of course, if you haven't proven out something, and if you're the first person to the table. But how do we create ways that are with a tolerable amount of risk that we can, you know, implement these, you know, audience-based tactics so that we can prove out the value and, you know, hopefully 3 or 4 years from now, live in a world where we are guaranteeing on outcomes. But one other, I mean, when Shenan was mentioning the, you know, when you're creating these strategies and you need, you know, analytics people, you need, like, there's an FTE cost as well with the right resources. And so I think there's another element of rethinking the way that we're compensated as an agency and moving towards more performance-based compensation. And so there's other ways to create incentives for advertisers to engage in these types of tactics, and rethinking, you know, the traditional ways that agencies are compensated, and how do we move into a world where we as an agency are incentivized to get better performance for our advertisers, and that will pay for itself from the advertiser's perspective if we're successful at driving the end outcomes.
Agency compensation, left for the last 5 minutes of the panel. Oh,
Always
I would get more time to get into it. We do have 5 minutes left. So one thing I want to do is, with this conversation, I wanted to plug actually tomorrow's panel at 10 a.m. Eastern. I think it's 4 p.m. CET, around OTT and CTV, because I think they'll dive deeper into this topic, especially, I would imagine. So I wanted to end. We've gone through a bunch of amazing questions. I wanted to kind of end with folks' thoughts on this, which is the thin line between relevant and creepy. Is there a double standard for digital versus other mediums? You know, how mad do we get when snail mail comes in and it's personalized to us based on data they're using? Are we going to start getting really upset when billboards change as we pass by because they know we're near them? Is there a tipping point coming when we end up in a world like Minority Report or WALL-E or any of those movies are suggesting? Let's go around the horn here and get people's thoughts. Stephen, I think you want to go first. Go for it.
Yeah, I'll start with that only because it's so critically important for our business. We as I've mentioned a few times, Holler, we analyze conversational content, the elements of conversation, and recommend content across a variety of apps, keyboards, platforms, and so for us, it's critically important that we deliver a really good user experience, because we're leveraging their conversation. We're leveraging their conversation to provide content at that moment that, as our mission is to enrich conversations everywhere, that is going to make that conversation better. We'll never sell their data. The creepiness for us is making sure that whatever happens, the experience stays within the experience. So for us, that fine line, Michael, is that if I'm talking to you about, hey, we can't go play golf this weekend, I'm going car shopping with my wife. Oh, great. What are you looking for? A Ford F-150. The last thing that's going to happen, we're going to give Ford the opportunity to participate in that conversation. However, you're not going to go to your Facebook feed or any other feed, and then you're going to see an ad for a Ford F-150. So for us, it's that trust, it's that delivering of value in a way that is hyper targeted to the conversation, but never ever letting it go outside of that. And that's core to who we are. And that's the way that we're going to remain and continue to grow our global footprint and have access to hundreds of millions of consumers as we do.
All right, Shenan, why don't you go next?
You know my opinion on this one. I mean, I can't remember the first time or the last time that a piece of snail mail decided to jump in front of my television screen while I was in the middle of watching a video. It doesn't stalk me. It doesn't track me around. I also will point out, and maybe this is just because I've gotten myself taken off of some lists, I think we're getting less and less of it, but it's still highly effective. And so when you look at MMM reports and you know, it's the same challenge with the upfront question that we were talking about before. When we look at the MMM reports, television is very effective. Snail mail can still be very effective, depending on who you're trying to target and what you're trying to get in front of someone. So I do always think that there is this risk of being creepy. And I think Stephen is right. You have to know where to draw that line, and you have to be really careful about that line. And I think it's up to our media partners, it's up to us as advertisers to make sure that we know what that means for us, and the consumer will decide, right, at the end of the day. Because when you have a brand that goes too far, the consumer will tell them clearly they have gone too far. When you have a brand who is smart enough, or a media partner who is smart enough to find that right balance that says, I'm here to provide you a service, and I know through that service that you are actually searching for a Ford dealer in your neighborhood, and so I'm going to send you directions to that Ford neighborhood, or to that dealer, or at least let you know that these are the 5 dealers that are around you that carry pickup trucks. That's a value to the person who had that conversation and who at least allowed that information to be shared, provided that information is shared in a way and captured in a way and used in a way that is compliant with everything we've been talking about today. And those compliances are important, right? That's what's going to allow consumers to do it. I think there's something else important to note here, and every generation has been scared of the tracking and the finding, et cetera. And I would argue most of us on the phone or on this panel are of a similar generation, maybe not quite exactly, but of a similar generation. We've been better about being tracked, partially because the industry you're in, but partially because of just the generation that we are. We're okay with things following us around a little bit. The next generation is that much more okay with it. And I think we're going to those trends as far as the generations are concerned, as much as we pay attention to kind of the holistic piece of it. My parents don't want to be tracked. They want to be completely off the grid. They think it's everything that happens that says, hey, I know something about you is creepy as far as they're concerned. My kids go, oh, you know something about me? That's super cool. Yes, I absolutely want that t-shirt. thank you, Instagram. So I think we just have to find that balance with the audience.
I think you're right to say that there's a generational shift also around all of this. Very interesting. What's creepy to the older, an older generation might be not as creepy to a younger generation, it would seem. My father-in-law reads the entire, report that comes out every time there's, he's being asked for consent, and will likely click no. But myself and my kids certainly will always click.
Yeah.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
Lauren, over to you. Creepy versus relevant.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely someone that has bought something on Instagram after being retargeted. So I'm ashamed to say that I've fallen into that. But
no shame.
I think, I think that, I'll answer this maybe from a personal perspective where I understand how retargeting works on the internet and how a lot of these targeting strategies work. And I, my husband probably doesn't like how many purchases come out of that retargeting. But I mean, I think for me, where the line is and what is, for someone who works in this industry and who thinks I know almost every tactic that marketers would use to create targeting, there's situations where I've gotten ads on my phone or on my computer where I was just having maybe a conversation in the room with someone about something and then got retargeted with it. Like if I can't figure out how they got my data and targeted me with something, like that's where the line should be drawn. And there's examples of things like this, happening in this space where different apps were configured to use the microphone on the phone to record sounds in the household and then create insights for targeting based on that. Like that is not something that I could ever opt into, but I've definitely seen advertising like that and wondered, oh my God, like I can't even figure out how they tied those things together. And if someone who is an expert in this industry and can't figure that out, then that is not appropriate. But I think consumers, especially as Shenan was saying, like the younger generations are starting to understand and accept those things, and they don't mind because they, figure out where to buy that t-shirt that influencer they like was wearing. And so for them, it's useful. And I think that increasingly that is going to be the perspective. If you are in market, for buying a car and you get relevant advertising towards that, that's helpful towards you. Like that's the whole point. And that's what we're trying to achieve for marketers so that they can get more efficient results from dollars they spend. But there's definitely a line when you don't know, if I took action and went to a website when I was searching for cars, I would understand if I get retargeting after that, but not if I'm, talking to my friend about something and I'm like, so I think there's a line of responsibility and that's, we have a huge focus of that at IPG. We have a whole brand responsibility team where we are, creating our own kind of policies and what we will and won't engage with and what partners we will and won't engage with based on the tactics they're using. So, just be responsible.
And Jake, you get the last word on this.
I'll be super quick. I know we're over.
Yep.
We know that there's a tension between privacy and personalization. There are two opposite ends of the spectrum. You can't have personalization and have privacy at the same time. It's just not possible. So every time I've thought that the public will move toward privacy, I've been wrong. Everybody always goes towards personalization. If you had told me that people would put an Amazon machine in their home to listen to everything they're talking about, I would say never going to happen. Incredibly popular. Google, giving them out for free. We know why. It works. So I'm not terribly concerned about that, the creepiness factor. For me, it's about user experience that when that breaks down, that's what's most annoying to me. And that's complicated. That's whether an ad takes too long to load and it's spinning on a page. That really annoys me. Or when I'm watching ad-supported Hulu and I get 4 ads for Carvana in the same 30-minute block because there's a problem with frequency capping, or they don't want to do another house ad and they're stuck with whatever inventory. Whatever the answer is, I'm sure Laura knows exactly what the answer is, but it's a terrible user experience. Just because I know it's Carvana and can tell you that now doesn't mean that I have any sort of goodwill toward that brand. And I think it can happen in OTT, it can happen in traditional broadcast television, it can happen on the worst, creepiest website that exists on the internet. It's all about that user experience. And if we're not doing a better job, and that takes the publisher, that takes ad tech, that takes the data, that takes everybody working together to ensure that there's a user experience that ultimately works. I mean, even in the business Steven's in, if I'm being inserted a conversation from a brand that I don't want at the wrong time, it doesn't matter that no data is being collected. It's a negative brand experience. So we're all, we all are stewards of this experience. And even a data company like us, we are very much stewards of that experience. And so the transparency of it and ultimately the user experience is critical. So I'll take maybe creepy over annoyed. I don't know. Neither one is great.
All right. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists for today to meet up in this virtual world and talk about a party we all can't be at right now. But thank you. Thanks everyone the millions of, viewers. I'm going to say billions now, billions of viewers. You can check the data on it later. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for other panels that are going on all week long from Smart and all the other partners that we're working with on this event. So thank you all. I guess applaud kind of in your own way.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you, everyone.
All right, everyone, have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Michael.
All right.
Bye now.
Bye.